Losing a spouse is hard, and the financial implications can add another layer of stress to the grieving process. In this episode, we're going to talk about the most common financial issues faced by widows and widowers, from dealing with income gaps to navigating tax changes as a single filer. And we're going to discuss actionable strategies to address these problems. Now, this episode is for you if you're concerned about ensuring the financial well-being of your remaining family members and safeguarding your financial future and legacy in the face of loss.
It's easy to get lost on the way to retirement. Things like taxes, improper planning, and excessive market risk can all lead you astray from your goal of a successful and happy retirement. That's where Liz Whittaberry comes in. She's a holistic financial advisor and the founder of Best Path Advisors, and she can help guide you to a better financial path. This is Retire on Your Best Path with Liz Whittaberry.
Welcome into another edition of Retire on Your Best Path with Liz Whittaberry, founder and financial advisor at Best Path Advisors. And a tough subject this week, but an important one to talk about, as Liz teed up, just navigating finances and dealing with the strategies and things that you're going to need to tackle after losing a loved one. And, Liz, it's one of those things where we don't like to talk about it, but, having a plan and a strategy ahead of time certainly can make this process a little smoother because you're going through obviously a lot. So, having some of these financial ducks in a row certainly can make that process a tad bit easier. How you doing?
I am good. And I absolutely agree with what you just said. Having things in, ducks in a row ahead of time can make that so much easier. My husband and I were just talking about this last week. We're starting to get the ads to prepay our funeral.
Okay.
Those are starting to come in the mail.
Yeah.
And there are some, we've had a lot of friends over the years. I've helped a lot of couples through planning ahead. And yet there's still some things that we haven't quite gotten around to. So we were having that conversation of things that we need to do to tie up all of the loose ends so that whoever's the survivor of us two doesn't have to think about those things at that point in time.
Yeah. Yeah. There's funny things in life that start to happen and you kind of go, well, boy, thanks for making me feel old, right?
Yeah.
You get these different random things like that. And that's one.
Yeah. They always say, yes, ma'am, at the grocery store now. And
there you go. Well, a little levity for a dark subject, or at least a tough subject sometimes for people to talk about. So let's jump into it. Obviously, Liz, you've worked with people who have lost their loved ones, right? It's the nature of your business, obviously, and what you guys do as financial professionals. And they come to you, wanting to be sure that they are in good shape financially. What are some of the problems that you typically see in folks in these situations?
And I think this is really good to think about ahead of time. And it's something that I like to talk about when we are starting a plan. I just had a couple in my office. They're becoming clients, and he had just started his pension, and he had chosen the 100% joint survivor, meaning when he passes away, his wife will get the same exact amount for as long as she's living if she happens to survive him. And, not everybody makes that choice, but it's important to think through what is that income going to be for the survivor, and what income gap is there going to be between what they're collecting now together and what they'll have when one or the other of them passes away. And of course, Social Security is a big one because Sure. you basically lose the smaller of the two checks. And these days, a lot of couples have almost equal Social Security income, so that,
right,
because both have worked. And so that can end up, cutting that benefit Social Security income coming into the house in half. Mm-hmm. And that can be a pretty big loss of income if you're relying on it and needing it. And so you've got to plan ahead. What are we going to do when we don't have that income?
Yeah.
The other thing,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, certain situations, people might find themselves literally cut in half, right?
Right.
Depending on
exactly.
how you've structured stuff. And as we all know, life, expenses don't necessarily get changed. And I mean, obviously, if you've never gone through this, you don't kind of think about it that way. But most of your expenses, they don't drop that much just because there's one less person coming down for breakfast. It's sad, but it's true.
Right. You have less food, but the cost of the property taxes, the property and casualty insurance, there's a lot of things that stay the same, whether it's one person or two people. The other thing that is a big difference is the income tax.
Right.
And people don't usually think about this either. until it's pointed out in the planning process. You go from being a joint filer, married filing jointly, to being a single filer. And that impacts a lot of the way the tax on the income. That impacts how everything flows through the tax return, what bracket you're in, what standard deduction you get. It can be a pretty big difference. I had done a YouTube on that probably back in January when we were, was really focused on taxes. And I used an example couple, Bob and Mary, and I said, well, they have $134,000 of income together. Bob has a pension. He selected 100% joint survivor. They've got Social Security. He has $36,000. She has half of that as the spouse, $18,000, and they're taking $50,000 from an IRA. So they've got $134,000 of income. They're paying tax on $92,700 as married filing jointly because first off, you only pay tax on 85% of your Social Security, but their standard deduction as a married couple is $33,200 at their age.
Correct.
So they pay $10,470 in tax on that gross $134,000 of income. They're in the 12% tax bracket.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty good.
That's pretty good.
That's
good. They've got decent income. They're in a low tax bracket. They're feeling good about that.
Mm-hmm.
If Bob passes away, they lose or if Mary passes away, they lose the smaller Social Security payment. So now the income is $116,000. They lose a lot of the standard deduction. Instead of being $33,200, it goes to $17,000. So now they're paying tax as a survivor on $93,600, and their tax due is $15,506 in the 22% bracket as the survivor.
Yep.
So they have $18,000 less income. They pay tax on $900 more of that income, and they pay $5,036 more in tax.
Yeah, big change, and drastic change. Yeah.
Big change. And people don't understand how big that might be. So there's the income gap. I'm losing more to higher income taxes on less income. And so this is the stuff that people need to really be thinking about ahead of time.
No, and that's a great point, and thank you for breaking that down. Obviously, the visuals on the video is a little easier to kind of follow along with, but I mean, I think you did a great job kind of illustrating that for folks listening today, because if you're, married filing jointly for 30, 40 years, you're not thinking about that, right? You thought about, you may have even thought about, hey, I'm going to be losing income because my loved one has passed. But the tax thing does kind of jump up and slap us because we just haven't been thinking about it because it's been in this rhythm, for 30 or 40 years of marrying filing jointly. So you mentioned the income gap term, right? So let's kind of pivot back to that. So how do you solve that, right? Especially if we're talking about trying to, pre-plan. How do we solve the income gap in advance?
Yeah, and that depends on the person. I would say that you always want to think through what option you're taking on your pension. I personally like the 100% to survivor. Some people don't feel like they need that, but you want to really think through what that is so that the survivor would get as close to the same income as possible. You want to be thinking through how you have your other assets structured. And this is one of the reasons that I like Roth conversions while both spouses are living and while we're in those gap years where we can have some, as far from the gap years from an income tax perspective, where we have some lower tax brackets and we can shift some money over to the Roth, because then that survivor can use the Roth account to create some additional income without creating additional tax and can help bring that tax down on their income as a survivor so that they maybe can come back down closer to that 12% bracket instead of being in the 22% bracket. It also helps with IRMA. We didn't talk about that, but the survivor would be in the next IRMA bracket up. As opposed, so they would have a higher cost of health insurance. So those Roth conversions can really help there. Sometimes people want to solve it with life insurance. I don't have a lot of clients myself that have life insurance, but it is an option to have some life insurance and have that come in to create that income. You've got to plan ahead for that because you've got to get it when you're young enough to get a good rate.
Right.
You can't wait till the last minute to get that.
Yeah. So again, every situation is going to be a little bit different, right? But solving for that income gap and a couple of strategies there, are something to think about. What if we kind of reframe that question a little bit, Liz, and say, okay, let's just say we've solved the income gap. We know the remaining spouse is going to be taken care of, which is obviously what you try to do when you're planning and strategizing for your clients. Then we can kind of maybe focus on looking at some of the other things, right? Because obviously legacy still comes up in this conversation. We all know we're going to pass away at some point. So, people come in and they want to work with a professional like you, and they're saying, hey, okay, we've got the spouse solved. Now what do we do so that they're good, but then anything left over for kids or grandkids? Any common mistakes or things on that front that you want to address?
I would say that the planning that we just talked about for the surviving spouse also helps with the kids. Because if we're really thinking through how we're going to set up the assets, what we're going to draw from to make sure that the surviving spouse has lower tax at that point in time, we have more Roth money that's saved for that. We're just really thinking through what we spend as a couple versus what we leave for later. We're also thinking about then what gets left for the kids. So if they have more Roth money or assets that get a step up in basis and less of those traditional IRAs that are a lot costlier to inherit, then that's better for them as well. I think that, beyond that, there comes a time where you really have to start pulling the kids into the conversation and getting a good understanding of, where they're at, as well as letting them know what your wishes and plans are so that they know in advance where they can help and what you would like for them to do when they inherit and what steps they should take. Those are some good things to begin to do as you get older in life.
Yeah, and that probably leads people to the question about, final documents, I suppose, right? Questions on trusts, things of that nature. I think a lot of people hear the word trust and feel like, well, that's for rich folks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it has that kind of connotation, but it really isn't anymore. Is that what's your take on that? Is that something that's worthwhile having conversations with a financial professional on?
I would agree that it is definitely worthwhile. My husband and I do have a revocable trust.
Okay.
And the revocable trust, and most of my clients do as well, the revocable trust is just a document that is an alternative to a will. There are certainly a whole lot of other trusts that are a lot more complicated, that are meant to do a lot of other things. But when we're just talking about passing our assets to the next generation, do you want to use a will? Go through the probate process.
I was going to say, because
do you want to use it?
Yeah. The funny thing I learned about wills a long time ago, Liz, I pass this on with our listeners, is I was always told that a will just means you will go through probate. I thought that was a great way of remembering that, right?
That's pretty clever. Yeah.
Right. So,
and that is true. And so that is public, and it can be time consuming because you've got to have a judge and you've got to have a court and the lawyer and all of those things. Whereas the trust is private. And that's the thing that I like the most about it. But it also allows you to put in more layers of wishes and explanation than you're going to put in a will that's, filed at the courthouse as a public document.
Now, the trick with a trust is funding it correctly, right? Is that where people make the mistake, is they may want to get one, but then they don't set it up or fund it properly?
Right. And if you're working with a good financial advisor who is helping you check that and make sure that everything is getting done, every I is dotted, every T is crossed, then, you can make sure that all of the funding gets done. And that is something that I help all of my clients with. And then we put that in, a secure vault, and that's going to be available to walk with the kids, walk through what they need to do at that point in time in the future. But if there's any assets that don't get properly coordinated, then you may end up having to go to probate for that asset, and you don't want to do that.
Gotcha.
If you've gotten a trust so that you can avoid probate. So you do want to make sure that you don't just sign the document, you do everything you need to do to avoid probate.
Yeah. So, again, not pleasant conversation, but important and things that you can really kind of dial in ahead of time. And I think the other, plus side of having this conversation with your loved one and you guys tackling this with a financial professional is you get your wishes kind of hopefully taken care of, right? And you can kind of dictate a little bit better what's going to happen. And then when something does happen to the loved one, the other person now also, not only do they have this documentation and these things in place, but if they're working with a professional like you, Liz, or whomever, they have that person to turn to. They have that resource then to turn to when they're in that emotional state. So any final thoughts or anything that we didn't cover?
Well, I was just going to tack on to what you just said and say, the whole goal when I'm working with my clients is to ensure that we have eliminated as much of the stress and decisions, all of those things that are hard to think about and focus on when you're going through a grieving process. And so eliminate as much of that, make it as easy as possible, and have somebody there that knows exactly what needs to be done when it needs to be done. And that's my goal for my clients.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's That way you're just kind of focused on the things that matter most. I share this story every so often, I think, with the listeners and different things. And it's like the house that my wife and I live in, we bought it from a lady. Her husband had passed unexpectedly. And she spent a couple of years getting the property cleaned up and getting her ducks in a row because they had no strategy, no plan. And everything was a mess. And she said to me when we were chatting, and we wound up actually just talking and chit-chatting and whatnot, and we were talking about, what I did for a living. And she's like, I didn't even get the chance to grieve for him because I spent too much time cleaning up the mess that was our life and our finances and I thought that hit me kind of hard. I thought, wow, that's pretty. Yeah. That's a pretty good reminder as to why knock this stuff out so that the person left behind can actually grieve for you, right? Can actually process your loss. So.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And I wish that it had been different for her, but that is exactly what we would like all of our listeners to avoid.
Yeah, exactly. So if you got some questions, need some help, if you haven't taken steps, please reach out to a qualified professional like Liz. Again, she's the founder and financial advisor at Best Path Advisors. You can find her online at bestpathadvisors.com. That's bestpathadvisors.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify or whatever platform you like using. That way you catch new episodes when they come out. You can also check out her YouTube, as she mentioned earlier. She's got a lot of great content on her YouTube channel, and that all that information is right there on her main website on the good stuff. So go check that out, subscribe to her, and we will see you next time here on Retire on Your Best Path with Liz Whittaberry. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you.
The preceding program is sponsored by Best Path Advisors, which is solely responsible for its content. Securities offered through J.W. Cole Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through J.W. Cole Advisors. Best Path Advisors, J.W. Cole Financial, and J.W. Cole Advisors are unaffiliated entities. The opinions expressed by Liz Whittaberry should not be construed as specific tax, legal, or investment advice, nor as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Neither J.W. Cole Financial nor its representatives provide legal, tax, or accounting advice. Persons who provide such advice do so in a capacity other than as a registered representative of J.W. Cole. Investing is subject to risks, including the loss of principal. Due to volatility within the markets mentioned, opinions are subject to change without notice. Information is based on sources believed to be reliable, however, their accuracy or completeness cannot be guaranteed.